This program is brought to you by DJ's Goalpost Sports Bar and Grill.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Pippen Dodds Packers podcast. I'm Tom Pippins, the star of the show, 6'6" from Marquette. John Dodds, our Packers historian, one of the all-time greats. It is a blessing to be back with you via Zoom. We have a special guest to bring in a little while, and we have a special guest to kick off with. Oftentimes, we old retired sportscasters, current sportscasters tend to be prone to overstatement. We use the word great a lot. Well, I think when you talk about the voice of the Green Bay Packers, Wayne Larrivee, you can use that, and it certainly fits, not only because he's one of the great play-by-play announcers in America, but he's a really good man, and we appreciate him very much taking his valuable time to spend a little of it with us. And Wayne, how are you?
Good, Tom. How you doing?
Couldn't be better. It really is super to see you. I appreciate that. I was thinking this morning, JD, that years ago, I remember thinking that Ron Wolf and Brett Favre were connected at the hip. And in some ways, maybe you and Wayne and Larry McCarron are at least connected by a ligament or something with your with your connection up there for Packers broadcast, right?
Oh, I'm a fly on the wall trying to provide a service and a tidbit every now and then. And I tell people you can learn a lot just by listening, because they know it. They've been at the practices, and they're just sit back and listen, and they'll throw you tidbits out, and sometimes they're insider tidbits that they maybe can't do it right away, but it'll come out and you'll learn about it. So I always appreciate working with Wayne.
Yeah. Wayne, you have a wonderful background that perhaps some people don't know. I think I had forgotten, if I knew. I forget a lot of things these days, that you were the voice of the Kansas City Chiefs, as JD was telling us. Maybe take us back before that. You're growing up, I believe, out east.
Yeah, I grew up in Western Massachusetts, right near the New York border in the Berkshire County, which is kind of a vacation destination now, especially on the East Coast. But I grew up in at that time in the 60s, it was, mill country, paper mills. Matter of fact, there were 3 of them in Lee, where I grew up. And, General Electric had a big station in Pittsfield, which was just north of us. So, Berkshire County was thriving in the early to mid 60s. And, the industry changed and things happened in the late 70s and all, but it transformed into what is now a quaint New England vacation area.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. JD, I know you're filled with questions for Wayne.
Sure. Wayne, I've seen you on the golf course. I know you're a pretty good athlete. Did you play sports growing up in high school?
John, I played a little basketball and I ran cross country. I didn't play much golf at all as a kid. I caddied a little bit, but didn't play much golf. But grew up really enjoying sports, and basketball was my favorite sport. And that's the one I always thought I'd grow up broadcasting for the most part. And I got a chance to do it, obviously, for a long time. But football is kind of where I evolved.
You got to be pretty smart to go to Emerson. That much I know, Wayne. And you went there, and you really worked. You honed your craft in the old Boston Garden. That's a sensational story. Please let some of your followers know who might not be able to appreciate part of the reason you have risen to the top.
Well, it's funny because I went to college at Emerson College, as you mentioned, in Boston. And the old Boston Garden, the Celtics and Knicks, and I was, like many of the kids I went to school with, New York sends its kids to Boston for school, okay? So you have a lot of New Yorkers in Boston, and you had the Knicks, of the great Knicks teams of that early to mid-'70s era, and the Cowens, Tom Heinsohn, John Havlicek, Boston Celtics. And so, it was great. What I would do is I found somehow an NBC bag tag, and I had a typewriter, and I put the bag tag on my typewriter, and I put a tape recorder inside the typewriter case, and would go to the Boston Garden and go to this is long before there was much security, but I would go to the back gate where the press went in, and I would dress up. I had a coat and tie on and that type of thing. And the guys would let me in, and I'd go in, and even got into the press area where they served dinner, and I got the game notes and everything. And then I went upstairs. This is long before there were sky boxes or anything like that. I went up to the old hockey boxes, which were unoccupied during basketball. And I would just sit there and broadcast every Celtics home game I was in town for into my tape recorder and kind of bring it home and review it and listen to it and that type of thing. And eventually I had other people listen to it. And that's kind of how I honed my craft, so to speak.
Oh, what a wonderful story, John, huh?
That's interesting. We had Kevin Harlan on last month, and he said the same, very similar. When he was a ball boy for the Packers, he would go up to the press box, and Lee Remmel would let him in, and he'd do a mock play-by-play from the radio booth when he was 12, 13 years old. So that's interesting. Who was your who did you like to listen to as a broadcaster? Were you a Johnny Most guy, or who was the guy you liked to listen to? Ray Scott or?
No, I was a New York guy, so Marv Albert was the voice of the Knicks and Rangers, and later the Giants. He was a big influence on me. As for baseball, I loved Phil Rizzuto because I'm a big Yankees fan, and who didn't like Phil Rizzuto if you were a Yankees fan? So that was fun. It was great. I listened to some great broadcasters. Here's the interesting thing. Cable TV was coming online along with color TV back in the early 60s, early to mid 60s. And so it was a big deal. It was like, a few years ago, HD TV, remember when that came on and everyone had to have an HD TV and whatever. But this was cable. And so my grandfather said to my dad, he said, if you put in cable, I'll buy you a color TV. And so my father did, and my grandfather bought the color TV. And then Grandpa would come up every day, every Thursday through Sunday, and watch the Yankees at our house on color TV. And that's kind of how I became a Yankees fan. But, that was a big deal back then. And our cable was all New York related because we were far western Massachusetts. We were a stone's throw from the New York line. Matter of fact, when we were kids, we used to go drinking in New York because it was legal there and it wasn't in Massachusetts. So state line and drink legally back then in high school.
Well, wait, I'm saying to myself, HD TV is the reason they booted me out of television. I said, where in the world was that like 30 years ago, But be that as it may, it's a wonderful story. I remember growing up in Syracuse, New York, you had two channels. And you just get up and you change the channel, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When did you know that this is what you wanted to do? I mean, you've been blessed with that golden throat. Did you come out of mother's womb with a microphone, or did it take a few years and listening to your favorite teams and announcers?
Yeah, that's kind of the evolution. I originally thought I'd be a high school teacher. And then I saw what they were doing to teachers in high school. I said, well, I don't think I can take that. So, obviously I had a tremendous interest in sports and loved to follow it. And that's when the Knicks kind of caught fire. And I was a big Yankees fan and listening to those guys. Bill White and Frank Messer were the announcers along with Phil Rizzuto. They were very good. Lindsey was the Mets announcer. He was tremendous. So I started, and then Marv Albert with the Knicks. When I started to catch on in high school with the Knicks, Bill Bradley was the guy I patterned my game after. And so those are the things that influence you as a kid. And then you start, building from there. And I just thought Marv Albert had a great flair for radio. He had a great call. The inflection of his voice could tell you as much as the words he was using. And so, I really, that's where I really started to get interested in this business when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was interesting. When I grew up in Milwaukee, my dad bought me the book, Bill Bradley's book, A Sense of Where You Are, which was his autobiography. And those Knicks teams, they meant a lot between Clyde Frazier and DeBusschere and Willis Reed. That was an exceptional team, and Phil Jackson was on that team. So that's an exceptional team.
Yeah, and years later, I was able to kind of connect with that team by getting to know Phil Jackson with the Bulls. And, I remember the stories, and I remember how he tried to create in Chicago that kind of team feeling, that kind of sense of the way to play the game. It was rooted in Red Holtzman, And the personification in the modern era became what Tex Winter wanted with the triangle offense, where everybody touched the ball at almost every possession. Michael Jordan, that was not what he wanted to do. That was kind of against who Jordan was. He was a guy who wanted the ball in his hands, and he was going to control the action. Whereas what Phil was looking for was a move the ball. Everybody's involved. The team eventually will get the ball to Jordan, but that kind of thing. Everyone has a hand in the fate of what happened on the floor, much like those Knicks teams. And by the way, you mentioned those Knicks teams: Bradley, DeBusschere, Earl Monroe, Willis Reed, all are in the Basketball Hall of Fame. All of them started that team, and that's amazing when you think about it. So Phil tried to recreate that in Chicago, and I thought he did a great job of that once he convinced Michael to share the ball a little bit.
And as we talk about your marvelous career, Wayne, one thing that really sticks out with me, and I mean this sincerely, you're such a good man and you're a humble man, and the way you treat other people, whether it's the rock on the air or anyone, it comes through loud and clear. Obviously, you're grounded spiritually and otherwise. Where did that all start growing up in Western Mass?
Well, I think my parents actually, my dad was one of those guys. He was an account exec. He was a sales executive. He bought the pulp. For the paper mill, the Hurlbut Paper Company. And I remember, they used to have, the executives would be able to hire their kids to work during the summer when we were in college. The paper company had all their employees. Whoever had kids going to college, they brought them on for summer, and it was good money. And work during the summer, and you could make some money to go to college. So anyway, I remember being in the paper mill summers and working with different people, and I remember how much respect they had and like for my dad. He was one of those guys, Tom. I'm sure you're kind of like this. That there are a lot of people who thought he was their best friend. Certain people like that. So the circle of people like that, where you've got 10 or 15, 20, 30 people that think that my dad was their best friend, and they thought he was their best friend. Just a kind of magnetism he had. He was a good man, God-fearing man in that regard. Treated people well, equally. So in that regard, I think that kind of rubbed off a little bit, I kind of have a harder edge than that. I'm not as likable as he was. But my point is this: is that it's funny. Greg Kelser, who played with Magic Johnson on the Michigan State team of 1979, and he and I worked a long time together in the Big Ten, and we'd be on flights and airports and things like that, and people would come up to him, and he was always so gracious with them. And so one day I asked him about that. I said, "Do you mind getting people coming up to you?" And he said, "Well, I don't necessarily like it, but," he said, "think about it this way. That person coming up to you is meeting you for the first and probably the only time in their life. The impression you make on them will last their entire lifetime. So when you're out in public and somebody recognizes you, it always makes me feel uncomfortable. But by the same token, you want to make sure their experience is a good one, because it's probably the only experience they're going to get with you."
What a super story. And I think we can say, all humility aside, Wayne, that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I'm sure you've made Dad very, very proud, and that's really just super. All right, JD.
Wayne, I've mentioned this to you before. I love you doing football, but I think basketball play-by-play on the radio. My wife and I drove down to see Marquette play in Louisville in the NCAA, and I think you and John Thompson were doing a game on CBS on the Thursday, the first day, and we're listening to it, and you painted a picture where I could see the game on my windshield as I was driving. And I thought, I've only heard Eddie Doucette and maybe Marv Albert do that when I'm listening to games. So why did you decide, or what brought you to, was it the love of basketball and then football, or why didn't you go to NHL? Was it just opportunity, or say Major League Baseball? What did you think? Did you always have a knack for play-by-play or calling things quickly?
Yeah, John, it's something you have to develop. Play-by-play is not something you can learn in a textbook. There are some good books out about play-by-play, one written by Tom Hedrick longtime voice of the Chiefs in their Super Bowl year back in '69, and a longtime voice of the Kansas Jayhawks. And he became a professor at Kansas and taught a lot of great broadcasters like Kevin Harlan, like Gary Bender, people like that. But you can't learn play-by-play from a book. You can learn the basics of it, but play-by-play is very much repetition. You have to go out and do it. And it's harder to do that today. You know, back in my day, you could go to an empty booth and broadcast the game without, you know, anybody around you. And it was great. But today it's not like that because every space of every arena is used. You can't go down to Fiserv Forum with a tape recorder and start broadcasting the game because you're right next door to people who are, you know, trying to watch the game and that type of thing. So it's a lot different today, but repetition is the big thing. Now, yeah, basketball was my favorite sport because I played basketball a little bit in high school, and I really loved what Marv Albert was doing with basketball on the air. And then I heard Marv do the Giants. He was, for a period of time, he did the Knicks, the Rangers, and the Giants. And I thought his football was excellent as well. So, you know, what happened was I started doing some high school football games, you know, commercially on weekends. And that, you know, one thing led to another. I got a big break. My junior year in college, as I finished up my junior year, I was contacted by a station in Pampa, Texas. And you know, I used to send out tapes to these blind ads in Broadcasting Magazine just to see what kind of, you know, feedback I get. And this time I got a job doing Friday Night Lights, the Pampa Harvesters down in Pampa, Texas, which is a small town of 25,000, about I want to say northwest of Amarillo by about 45 minutes. So you're up in the panhandle of Texas. And the town had two tall structures. One was the grain elevators on one side of town. There was a Jimmy Dean sausage making plant, which cast some incredible aromas around 6 o'clock in a hot throughout the whole town. But the other structure, the tallest structure, was the press box of the football stadium. And every Friday night, 15,000 would show up to see their Pampa Harvesters play on Friday night. And I got to broadcast those games. And, you know, Tom, you asked earlier, when did you really know you wanted to do this? Well, that period of time, I took one semester out of school and I did that. And that kind of convinced me that, yeah, I'd like to do this for a living.
Just great. John has talked about and seen it firsthand, helping with statistics in the booth with you and Larry McCarron. Your preparation is over the top. As accomplished as you are, you know, you've made it to the top. You don't flaunt it, but that's a fact. And yet, with all that you do, the different sports, your preparation never wanes. To me, that's the one thing, having been in it, to appreciate it a little bit, Wayne, is the only thing I would ever criticize if I felt someone was not prepared, including myself, because that's something that we can control. And yet you never let up. You're like Lombardi. You know, we strive for perfection and achieve excellence, which you certainly have.
We strive for perfection. We hope we're good. You know, it's funny. You know, preparation, I go back to the old Al McGuire. I never forget, I was at a banquet in Chicago, and Al McGuire was speaking to a group at Northwestern, and mostly athletes. It was, you know, a banquet. I think I was MC, and I introduced Al, and he did his speech. And John probably knows this, and maybe you do too, Tom. You know, Al had this line. I want to say it was the 6 Ps, he called it. Proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. Kind of, you know, the way, that's how, ever since I heard that, that's always been the way I've kind of approached the job. You know, it's funny, I really enjoy doing a game when I'm prepared. When I'm not, it's not as much fun. And it's hard to do when you're not as prepared, when you don't feel comfortable with the material. So I try never to let that happen. I try to always be prepared. Once you prepare, though, it's a performance industry. It's a performance business. Some days we have good days. Some days we have bad days. Some days our bios are good. Some days our biorhythms are bad. So even good preparation, though, on a bad day can make you sound okay. On a good day, you could take it to the next level.
What impressed the heck out of me was when you the scroll that you bring in, this laminated scroll, because the booth is open, and that one kind of surprised me when, you know, you broadcast in the open air because it sounds better. The background, the fans, everything doesn't sound like we're in a phone booth or whatever, but you have this scroll and it's laminated. You have one team on one side and one team on the other. And it was so big that they even made a shelving unit kind of outside the press box so you could clip it so the wind wouldn't blow it. Can you talk about that scroll and what you're looking for on that?
Yeah, that's a week's of preparation, for each team. And matter of fact, just to give your people an idea of what we're talking about here, I mean, this is kind of this is what it looks like, and this is a week of preparation. This is notes and stats and things that I'm looking for. You can see everything is numerical on the side. Everything is positional in the middle. Same thing for the offense. And what this does is it gives, we have a spotter, and, the spotter can basically just see who got it on the tackle. Doesn't have to know anything about the game. Number 56 got there first. He points to number 56. Meanwhile, through the week of preparation, putting this board together, it kind of helps me study and memorize the names and numbers and gives the players of both teams some definition in my mind. So it's really a tool of preparation. And then on game day, it can be a source of information, because there'll be times during game and I'll say, something will happen. I'll say, I've got a note on that. And a lot of times I don't remember where the note is. So you look on the boards and you try to figure it out. But that's really that's a tool of preparation that I use. And I work on that all week.
And knowing you, Wayne, and how much you put in your head, a lot of it may not get out there, but as you say, it's there if you need it, right? Yeah. And if something comes up that warrants, oh yeah, I remember preparing for that. So yeah, the perfect timing. And I've heard that and I can tell that, and I think your listeners can, and viewers, depending on the situation.
Yeah. But again, that's the preparation part of it. And that's the process I go through.
He's one of the greats in the biz, as we've been saying. Wayne Larrivee, the voice of the Green Bay Packers. And Wayne, I don't know how many people can say they have that trademark phrase. You can sell merchandise, the Dagger. You've been asked it a zillion times, I know, but there are many who don't know the story. And frankly, I don't. So I'd love to hear how that originated. It is one of the fantastic calls in all of broadcasting.
Well, I appreciate it, Tom. Actually, it's a basketball term. We were talking so much basketball. And I never used it in my career till I got to Green Bay. And I remember I was doing a Bulls game Saturday night in Chicago. And, in basketball, we use the Dagger when the game's coming down the stretch. It's a 1 or 2 possession game. And somebody hits a 3-point shot with 10 or 15 seconds to go, makes it a 3-possession game. And the other team doesn't have enough possessions left in that game to catch up. And that's the Dagger, So it happened on a Saturday night in Chicago, and the next day, Sunday, it's like 2000, 2001, I want to say, and the Packers are playing the Baltimore Ravens. And I remember it was, Brian Billick was the head coach of the Ravens. The University of Wisconsin marching band was there. It was a big game. The Ravens were the defending world champions, and the Packers and Ravens are going back and forth all day. And finally, Brett Favre hit Bubba Franks in the south end zone on a touchdown pass in the fourth quarter that gave the Packers a 3-score lead with a little less than half the quarter to go. And I said, there's your Dagger. Because I knew at that point there's no way the Ravens offense was going to be able to make up that kind of ground. And so that kind of took off from there. And, in some weeks when the Packers win and I don't use that term for whatever reason, I get all kinds of feedback. Where was the Dagger? Why didn't you use the Dagger?
All right, thanks, Wayne.
Thank you, Wayne Larrivee. God's blessings to you and the family, Wayne. And Lord willing, we'll get to hear that wonderful call, the Dagger, before too long. It's been a treasure. Thank you. And for Don Matovich, John Dodds, our producer is Jason Ruck, WSS Sports. Tom Pippins, the Pip and Dodds Packers podcast. Thank you, everybody, and God's blessings to you.